What was the stupidest thing you did as a child? We had a big flagpole in our front yard, and I was holding it with one hand and just running around it in circles. When I stopped, I looked up, and I didn't comprehend that I was dizzy. I just thought that the flagpole was swaying like crazy and about to fall over. I started squeezing it with all my might and screaming bloody murder. I didn't want to get in trouble, and I didn't want the pole to fall on our house or knock over the tree next to it. After what seemed like screaming forever, my dad came running out and started laughing his ass off. I still wouldn't let go because I didn't believe that it was okay. Finally, he grabbed it and said it was okay for me to let go, so I did. Crisis averted. I just think it's funny that little 5-year-old me thought that I was capable of holding up a 30-foot pole by myself.
That's a classic kid moment. Running around a flagpole and thinking you can actually hold it up. Kids have this wild sense of confidence. The mix of panic and innocence is something else. Your dad just laughing must have been a good sight. A reminder of how exaggerated our fears can get at that age. It's a funny memory to look back on, realizing how far we come from those wild thoughts.
When I was about 5 years old, I bought a toy plastic gun. It fired darts that stuck to the window. It also had little plastic rounds that my dad tested and told me specifically not to use. I looked at the plastic bullets and looked at the gun and thought these could not possibly fit in that. The panic that then followed when I realized my dad would be mad that I had done exactly what he had told me not to do. I looked in the barrel to see if the plastic bullet was in there, but I couldn't see it. I then came up with a brilliant solution. I shot myself in the eye. DR played Russian roulette when I was 5. Edit. Autocorrect.
That's a wild story. I can picture a little kid thinking it's all just a game. You have that moment of panic when you realize you messed up, then the ridiculous solution that just makes it worse. It's pretty funny, but definitely a lesson learned early on. Kids can be pretty reckless, but at least you got a story out of it. Just glad it didn't end up worse.
I snorted a Coca-Cola. I overheard my mother talking to my father about her friend. Apparently her friend had started snorting cocaine again, and all my mom said was she's snorting coke again. Little old me is wondering why anybody would snort coke, so I want to see what the big deal was. Cut to me going in the fridge, sticking a straw in a can of coke, and snorting that shit up my nose. It burned like hell, and I couldn't smell for the next week.
That's a wild story. As a kid, I remember trying to imitate adults' habits too. I once saw someone making a weird concoction and thought it was cool. Tried it, and it ended up tasting horrible. Realized some things are better left alone. It's funny how we don't think things through when we're curious. Just a lesson learned the hard way, I guess.
My best friend lived a few houses down the street from me when we were kids. She got mad at her mom one day and decided to run away from home. So I went with her, because she's my best friend, and you don't let your best friend run away alone. We were not old enough to cross the street by ourselves, so we ran away by circling the block several times. Her parents never knew we were gone.
That sounds like a typical childhood adventure. It's funny how serious things feel back then, but running away just meant a few laps around the block. We thought we were tough, but really, we were just kids trying to figure things out together. It's memories like that which show how close friends can be, even in silly situations.
Tried to climb a telephone pole. Couldn't reach the metal handles, so just grabbed the sides of the pole and tried to pull myself up. Instead, I dragged my hands down the side of the wood. Spent the next 2 hours having hundreds of small splinters removed from my palms. Edit. TLDR grabbed some wood, got handfuls of little pricks.
That sounds rough. I remember a time when I tried to do something similar. I thought I could impress some friends by climbing a tree. Ended up with a huge scratch on my leg and spent days trying to heal it. Sometimes trying to show off doesn't go as planned. At least we learn not to test our limits too much.
I was 6 and my brother was 9. We grew up in the country and enjoyed playing in the mud. We would take the hose and make a mud pit out back and just be redneck kids. We got home from school one day and saw a huge mud pit out back. We immediately ran out there in our school clothes and started going crazy in it, running and diving, throwing it at each other, rolling all around. While our mom walks out and her jaw completely drops. She screams at us to take all of our clothes off and get in the carport. She hoses us down with super cold hose water, and we thought she was mad that we had been playing the mud in our school clothes. We then go inside and get in the tub, and she is furiously scrubbing us down. We had mud all in our ears and under our fingernails. It was everywhere. We couldn't understand why she was so mad, though. We had done this many times before. Once we were cleaned up, she got on the phone to our dad. She said someone needed to come out right away. The septic tank was busted.
That sounds like a classic childhood moment. Just two brothers making a mess and having fun without a care. I can picture the panic on your mom's face when she found you both covered in mud. It's funny how kids think they're in trouble for one thing, but there's a whole other issue behind it. The septic tank story adds a twist. Those memories of carefree days in the mud really stick with you.
I have never been big on naps, so during nap time at preschool, I would just lie in my cot wide awake looking around and being bored. One day during nap time, I noticed some playground gravel on the floor next to my cot. Picked it up and started playing with it, then decided to put it in my ear. Immediately panicked and tried to dig it out, but only managed to push it farther in. Had to go to the doctor to get it removed. I also drank Bactine, an antiseptic, once and had to go have my stomach pumped.
Sounds like a rough time. Just lying there while everyone else was napping must have been boring. Picking up gravel and putting it in your ear is definitely an unusual choice. I can imagine the panic when it got stuck. And drinking Bactine? That's a whole other level of trouble. It's wild to think back on those childhood moments that seem small but end up being a big deal later.
When I was around 4, I decided to cut the lamp cord with my child safety scissors. I ended up cutting through it, and I then touched my thumb to the exposed wires. All I remember is waking up with my thumb bandaged and in a birdcage thingy. When I was 6, I had the bright idea to jump off the top of a play castle. The stupid part was I had a Donatello TMNT staff in my mouth. I had to have surgery and couldn't eat solid food for a long time. Somehow, I am still alive and breathing at 25 years of age.
Kids do some wild stuff. It's crazy how curious we can be. I remember a friend who tried to climb a tree and ended up stuck for hours. Parents were freaking out, but he just thought it was a fun adventure. We learn from those moments, I guess. It's a miracle we all made it this far without major injuries. Just goes to show how resilient we are, even when we make questionable choices.
My mom said I used to run out of the bathtub naked and giggling while making her chase after me. She told me to stop or I would get hurt. One day I ran out and tried to turn a corner, slipped on the hardwood floors and fell into the cat litter box. I was covered in cat shit and litter and crying because it was so awful. My cat was not amused. There's also a scar underneath my eyebrow that you can't see, but you can feel it. No one in my family knows how I got it or when I would have busted my face open. But it's there.
That sounds like a wild memory. Kids can be pretty reckless, especially when they're having fun. Running around like that probably seemed like a good idea until things went south. Falling into the cat litter box definitely must have been a tough lesson. And the scar adds a bit of mystery to the whole thing. It's funny how some moments stick with you, even if you don't remember all the details.
I was playing The Floor is Lava and ran out of pillows to step on. So I found these weird big discs on my mom's room and spread them all over the carpet so I could jump from disc to disc. My mom got home hours later and freaked out. I had broken every one of her records she had collected throughout her life. I'm surprised I'm still alive today after that incident.
That sounds like a wild day. It's funny how a game can lead to unexpected chaos. I can only imagine the look on your mom's face when she saw the mess. It's one of those moments that stick with you, a mix of fun and panic. It's good you can laugh about it now, though I guess you learned not to mess with her stuff again.
My father was a pothead and worked for a place that would regularly piss test him. Luckily for him, he knew one of the guys in charge and would get a heads up a day or two before the urinalysis. To try and pass the test, he would drink a shit ton of vinegar and water. Little tiny 4-year-old me saw Daddy drinking from a jug all the time and thought, hey, Dad usually drinks soda, and soda is great, so that must be really great, and took a big swig. I still hate pickles and vinaigrettes and anything made with vinegar almost 3 decades later.
That's an interesting story about your dad. It's kind of funny how just seeing him drink that stuff made you think it was something good. Kids can really misinterpret things sometimes. I guess that experience stuck with you, especially hating vinegar for so long. It's wild how those early memories shape our preferences later in life. Your dad's routine definitely created a memorable moment for you, even if it wasn't exactly what you thought it was.
I took a dump in a hollowed-out tree stump in my front yard when I was 7. Neighbors called the police. It was hilarious to me then, and it still is now. Edit. For those wondering why they called the police, I think it was less of them calling the police on a 7-year-old, and more of the fact they were concerned about the half-naked child pooping in a tree stump in plain sight, and thought it was worth having the police check in on my home life. I came from a very normal family, though. My mom didn't find it as funny as I did. This was 17 years ago.
That's a wild story. Kids do some strange things. It's funny how something so innocent can cause such a reaction from adults. Sounds like the neighbors were just looking out for you, even if it was overkill. Your mom probably had a different perspective on the situation. It's good that you have a sense of humor about it now. Crazy how memories like that stick around for years.
I ate pretty much anything I could get my hands on and had to be taken to the hospital, basically on a monthly basis. Any kind of dirt or plant. Sure, some eye drops that I had to scale a cabinet to get to. Oh yeah, whatever raw meat was defrosting on the counter that night. Duh, all of my grandfather's heart pills? Yeah, that was a big one.
I had a friend like that. He never really thought things through when it came to food. I remember one time he tried to eat a whole pack of those raw ramen noodles dry. Just crunched them up like a snack. Ended up with a stomachache and a trip to the ER. We still joke about it. Guess some people just don't learn from their mistakes.
My brother and I were pretty young, 5 to 7 years old range, and lived out at a farmhouse with a barn, and there was a big hill in our backyard. We wanted to go sledding one day after a big snow and canceled school, and we didn't have any sleds. No problem, though, because we had see people go sledding on tubes all the time, and we had a big truck tire in the barn just waiting to be pushed up the hill and rode. Keeping in mind a couple kindergarten first graders were the only ones moving this motherfucking tire. It took us several hours with breaks to get this tire out of the barn and through the several inches of fresh powder and up the hill. It was going to be so worth it, though, with the brisk air flowing through our hair as we flew down the hill. We finally got the tire up to the top of the hill feeling victorious. We jumped on the tire to slide down the hill, and we just sunk further into the snow. Obviously, worst snow day ever. TLDR. People sled on tubes. Not 40-pound tires.
I can relate to that. My friend and I tried to use an old plastic bin for sledding once. We thought it would work just like the tubes we saw. Spent ages dragging it to the top, only to figure out it didn't glide at all. We ended up just sitting in the snow, laughing at how silly it was. Sometimes the effort doesn't match the fun, but it's all about the memories.
I locked my brother and the babysitter out of the house and cut my hair while making eye contact with them. We lived in the hood, so our screen door had no screen but was kind of like having bars on the windows, only on the front door. I went and got the scissors and cut my bangs down to the scalp. I stood just out of reach while they tried to reach in and grab me and screamed at me to open the door. My mom came home and beat me. I have a picture on Santa's lap with the hairdo.
That's a different kind of childhood moment. Locking your brother and the babysitter out while you go for a drastic haircut is bold. Cutting your bangs down to the scalp while they yell must have felt rebellious. Your mom's reaction when she got home probably wasn't a surprise, but it's wild to think about the chaos. The picture with Santa must be interesting with that haircut. Kids do some wild things sometimes.
When I was a toddler, I loved corn. I couldn't get enough of it. So one day my dad had left some corn on the cob out on the counter while he was lighting the grill. Since I was too short to reach the corn, but I was completely determined to get it, I decided it would be a good idea to use the dishwasher as a kind of makeshift staircase. Kami struggling to open the dishwasher and proceeding to try to climb it. Well, during my climb, my tiny toddler foot got stuck in the top rack of my staircase. When my dad came back inside, he was greeted by his child stuck in the dishwasher and stretching as much as he could trying to reach the corn he wanted so badly.
That sounds like a classic toddler moment. It's funny how determined you can be at that age, especially for something as simple as corn. Using the dishwasher as a staircase is pretty clever, though a bit risky. I can imagine your dad's reaction seeing you stuck like that. It's hilarious in hindsight, just a little reminder of how far you'd go for something you really wanted back then.
I wrote every bad word I knew on the side of the Lego container. Pig and bum were pretty high on the list. I had a sheltered childhood. Actually, I didn't. My dad used to fix cars in the shed and lose it occasionally, screaming fuck at the top of his lungs. Maybe I thought that was a regular word.
That's an interesting take on growing up. It's amusing how we pick up words from our environment, especially as kids. I remember some friends trying to impress each other with what they thought were bad words. And looking back, those words never seemed that serious anyway. It's all part of figuring out what's acceptable and what isn't. Life lessons come in odd forms sometimes.
When I was about 8, my mom had this key with a nice translucent purple plaque, and I thought that it was a special key that can open portals. And in order to open the portal, one must enter the key in an electrical socket. All the while my mom was watching. I entered the key, and the jolt sent me backwards a couple feet. I didn't cry outright, I just had this dumbfounded look on my face, looked at my mom, and then cried. The key turned black. Needless to say, that debunked my portal opening theory.
That's a wild story. I can imagine the surprise when you realized it wasn't a portal key. Kids really do have the wildest imaginations. Your reaction of confusion first, then crying, is classic. It's funny how we think some objects might have special powers. The fact that the key turned black adds a bizarre twist. Definitely a memorable childhood experience, though not a great moment for mom to witness.
I read Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams when I was about 10. I took its advice on flying a bit too literally. There's an art, it says, or rather a knack to flying. The knack lies in learning how to throw yourself at the ground and miss. Pick a nice day. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy suggests and try it. The first part is easy. All it requires is simply the ability to throw yourself forward with all your weight, and the willingness not to mind that it's going to hurt. That is, it's going to hurt if you fail to miss the ground. Most people fail to miss the ground, and if they are really trying properly, the likelihood is that they will fail to miss it fairly hard. Clearly, it is the second part, the missing, which presents the difficulties. I had more than the suggested amount of bruises, scrapes, and broken bones as a child.
That sounds like a wild experience. I remember trying something similar once. We were playing outside, and I decided to jump off the swing with my friends. Didn't really think it through. Ended up landing hard and rolling on the ground. A few scrapes, but nothing too serious. Just a lesson learned about overestimating my skills. Kids do some interesting things. Guess that's part of growing up.
I was playing with the pedals on an exercise bike, pretending it was a Ferris wheel, back before the chains were typically covered with plastic. Somehow my fingers got caught in the chains and were ripped apart right to the bone. Blood everywhere, and I had to have them surgically reattached. The nerves are still messed up 22 years later.
That sounds rough. I knew this guy who had a similar accident with a bike. He was just messing around, trying to show off, and ended up getting hurt. It's crazy how one moment of fun can turn into something serious. It's been years, but he still feels some pain from it. Makes you think twice about playing around with things like that. Glad you made it through.
I tried to jump about a 6-foot chain link fence when I was 9 and got hung up by one of the wires. It ripped right through the seat of my brand new Sergio Valentes in my underwear. Some girl I had a crush on drove by with her mom, and I tried to look as suave and sophisticated as I could while hanging from a fence. Then I had to wait, bare-assed and crying until I was rescued by a passerby several minutes later.
That's a classic story. Trying to look cool while stuck on a fence is something every kid can relate to. The embarrassment of that moment must have felt like forever, especially with your crush passing by. It's funny how these moments are both terrible and hilarious in hindsight. Definitely a memory that'll stay with you for a long time.
I was at Rottnest Island. I am in Australia, and there was a large cliff with an overhang. 8-year-old me decided I should go and try break a piece of rock off and see it fall all the way down. So I walk up to the edge and start stomping my foot on this piece of thin rock. I was crouched, so I thought I wouldn't fall, but didn't realize that momentum would carry me forward and over the cliff. Luckily, my brother was there and grabbed me before I could fall once I hit the rock off. If he wasn't there, I would have died. Good times.
That sounds like a wild experience. It's crazy how quickly things can go wrong when you're just trying to mess around. Having your brother there made the difference between a cool story and a really bad outcome. It's kind of a reminder about being safe and not pushing limits too much, even when you're just having fun. Glad you could laugh about it later.
Despite my mom telling me that cats are evil, I tried to pet the cat of a family friend and got a bite for my trouble. To cover up this fact, I started wearing a Captain Hook hand constantly, even when bathing. While the psychologist my parents asked about it, both my brother and I are on the spectrum, so already a regular thing, said it was a phase. After a month of 2, my parents decided enough is enough and pulled it off, to find that the hand had become infected and swollen into the shape of the hand cover, the black dome part, and came out with the same sound as cranberry sauce coming out of the can. Edit. Honestly, the most surprising part is that I still remembered the why after they got the hook off instead of forgetting at some point and just assuming it was the order of things. This is my mom, this is my dad, this is my hand, and this is my hook.
That's an interesting story. Trying to pet a cat can go sideways quick. I get the whole phase thing though. Kids do weird stuff sometimes. The part about the hand getting infected is kind of wild. I can picture it, and honestly, the sound is something else. It must have been a strange time for you. Glad you still remember why you started wearing it.
I've done plenty of dumbass things in my childhood, but these particularly stand out among them. My predominantly Asian elementary school gave out red envelopes with $1 inside to every kid on Chinese New Year's. I stole several from the open desks during break, tore the envelopes, and tossed them out in the class trash bin. That same year, after a misunderstanding regarding government fingerprinting, which I had taken to be a method by which every guilty thing you've done could be detected, I confessed to my mother every criminal act I believe I had done, bawling my eyes out. I brought my wallet to summer camp and boasted that I had $70 worth of allowance, fanning out the ones and acting as if I could buy the world. During an intense series of matches of Stratego, the friend whom I had designated as my wallet holder lost it. Being an awkward kid, I didn't know what to do and just accepted it.
That's an interesting mix of childhood memories. Stealing those envelopes and then having a meltdown over it shows how wild thoughts can get. It's funny how kids think they can buy anything. Losing the wallet at summer camp must have been tough, especially when you were showing off. I guess it's all part of growing up and learning from those moments.
I got arrested when I was 16 for carrying a BB gun around town and throwing fireworks in a dumpster with 2 friends. We were shooting the BB gun at things in someone's backyard, and 2 police cruisers pulled up and told us to drop the gun. They cuffed us and put us in the back of the cruisers until our parents came and got us. Sad face. Only had to do community service for it. On the bright side, I got my 15 minutes of fame. There was an article about it in the local paper, /.
That sounds like a wild experience for sure. Getting arrested at 16 must have been a shock. It's kind of funny how you ended up with a little bit of notoriety from it. Community service is better than the alternative, though. I guess you learned a lesson about having fun and the consequences that can come with it. It's good that you can look back and laugh now.
I discovered that if you stick a plastic cup over a candle, it would not only put the candle out, but it would also make the plastic cup crumple up. Me being the curious, although not entirely intelligent child, I wondered what would happen using a normal glass. I gingerly placed the glass on top of the candle and gently pressed down when unexpectedly the glass shatters and I smush my hands down onto a bunch of broken glass shards. Telephone pole kid and I could have been friends, I think.
That's a classic curious kid move. I remember trying something similar with my friends. We thought covering a candle would be cool too. Luckily, we just used an old jar, and it cracked but didn't shatter. We learned quickly about safety and exploring things without hurting ourselves. It's funny how those small experiments stick with you, even if they don't end well. Seems like you had a wild moment there.
When I was about 6 or 7, my parents took me on this super long walk. They always dragged me on walks as a kid, but halfway through this when I must have been really tired. My parents say we're stopping for lunch, and we end up sitting on this rock on a steep hill. I sit down, close my eyes for a second, and the next thing I know I'm rolling down this hill, with my mom screaming my name in the background. Waking up, I stop myself from rolling down the hill and walk back up to my family, pretending nothing happened. Looking back on this, there were quite a few people watching. Thank God you don't care about that stuff when you're June 7th.
That's a classic kid moment. Just imagine sitting there, all relaxed, and then suddenly you're rolling down a hill. The panic from your parents must have been something. It's funny how you didn't even care about the audience watching. As kids, we just live in the moment and brush off the chaos. Definitely a solid memory to look back on. Kids have a way of turning everything into an adventure, even when it's unintentional.
A girl I used to like left my middle school in the middle of 7th grade. She came back to visit for a day in 8th grade, and she looked like fire with legs. She was so hot. I knew I had to talk to her because we ended things on a weird note. So I prepared myself, checked my breath, picked out the fro a little bit, walked up, and screamed in her face.
That sounds like an awkward moment. It's funny how we build up these interactions in our heads. You probably just wanted to make a good impression, but then everything went sideways. It's relatable, though. Everyone has those cringe moments in middle school. At least you tried to step out of your comfort zone, even if it didn't go as planned.
I guess it was being too sensitive about certain things. Like at the age of 8, if little Timmy said I looked stupid, I would get really pissy with him and cry at home. I'm still somewhat sensitive as an adult, but that changed a lot when I got into this one girl who really liked to be on the edge. Might I add, that relationship ironically fell off the edge.
Sounds like you had a rough time with being sensitive when you were younger. It's interesting how relationships can influence us. Sounds like that girl was a challenge in a way, pushing you out of your comfort zone. But it's too bad it didn't work out. Sometimes those experiences teach us a lot, even if they don't last. Just part of growing up, I guess.
When I was small, my brother and me would be left home alone quite often, so we played games that we made. One day we were bored and wanted to play dodgeball, but we didn't have the balls. So I had this genius idea that we could use the kitchen chairs as a substitute. My older brother agreed as long as he started off with the chair. I agreed. Here I am standing against the wall looking at my older brother, holding a chair above his head. He launched it at me, and luckily I was in between the legs of the chair. Unfortunately, the legs made it through the wall. We decided to cover up the holes with our pillows so our parents wouldn't find out. Looking back, that wasn't the best idea, and I don't know why I didn't think of using pillows instead of the chairs.
That sounds like a wild time. Using chairs for dodgeball is pretty risky. Guess you two really wanted to make your own fun. Covering up the damage with pillows is classic sibling logic, though. I can see why you didn't think straight about using pillows instead. Sometimes you just go with whatever seems like a good idea at the moment, even if it leads to a mess. That's how you learn, I guess.
I was in 7th grade, and we had a bathroom break in between classes. So all of my friends would go in the bathroom and talk, and do what we needed to do. Well, one day, someone found a metal fork and dared me to stick it in an outlet. I wrapped the fork's handle in paper towel and stuck it in the outlet. Some smoke came out and it sparked, but I didn't die. Mad props from all my friends ensued. Smiley face.
That sounds pretty reckless. It's crazy how we think we're invincible at that age. I remember doing dumb stuff for attention too. You get caught up in the moment, and suddenly it feels like you're part of something bigger. Glad nothing serious happened to you. It's wild what we do just to impress friends.
Built a crossbow with my cousin when I was about 9 to 10 years old. Well, that in itself is not stupid. It's what we did with it, that is. To give you an idea what we made, here is the construction manual. Take a cut 2x4, roughly 12 to 16 in long. Hammer in 2 nails at an angle at one end of the 2x4. Take an elastic, cut it and attach each end to each nail. Take a clothespin and nail it down through the hole in the middle where the spring is at the other end of the 2x4. And voila! Just take a small rock and clamp it down in the elastic using the clothespin, and you have got yourself a neatly loaded crossbow, ready to be fired at passing cars in front of your home. Yeah, that last part, that's the stupid thing we did, sad face.
That definitely sounds like a reckless adventure. I remember similar moments with friends when we thought we were invincible. We made some wild inventions too, but nothing quite as dangerous. Just having fun without thinking about the consequences. Looking back, it's pretty funny how naive we were, but also kind of scary when you realize what could have happened. It's good we grew out of those kinds of things.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.